Thank you very much, and I have to say I'm honored to be here this morning, and particularly to be this kickoff presentation. I really want to thank Amy and Tiffany for the invitation. They have been incredibly good at keeping me right on target. I think I know some of what you may have gone through this semester, which is great. But I do want to say it's been phenomenal. They are incredibly organized people, and I am so impressed. But I'm also impressed with what I've read about what you've been doing. I am going to be speaking about the Sargasso Sea. You know a lot, but I really want to just let you know who I am and where I come from. In the U.S. Department of Commerce, NOAA has a system of national marine sanctuaries, 13 national marine sanctuaries and 1 marine national monument. We manage and protect more area than all the national parks combined, and that's going to grow here very shortly. It's an incredible area, but we've broken that up now into 4 different regions. And this region down to the southeast is the one that I manage. And we currently have 3 national marine sanctuaries: the Flower Garden Banks, the Coral Reef area, about 100 miles due south of Texas-Louisiana border, one of the healthiest coral reef systems in the wider Caribbean still. The Florida Keys, where I started out as a manager in 1983 of the Lou Key Sanctuary, took over managing the Florida Keys Sanctuary in 1990 to 2006 when I was promoted to regional director. And then we have Gray's Reef, which is a sedimentary rock reef up off the coast of Georgia, just a little bit out, about 40 miles southwest of the Savannah River mouth. Really interesting, different kinds of areas. We're in the process of taking sanctuary nominations. Finally, we've opened that up. A year ago this month, we opened up the process to receive new nominations. I'm getting quite a few coming in from Puerto Rico, some from the Northeast Florida area. Southeast Florida is interested, but I won't go into those details. We are looking at expanding our program after many years. But this is what I'm going to be talking about, and this is what you know a whole lot about. And I know I'm going to tell you some things that you know already, but you know, it doesn't hurt to hear it more than once. And you might even hear some more of it from Robbie, I'm sure. But the Sargasso Sea area, I was privileged to be invited to one of the first meetings that the Sargasso Sea Alliance, actually we formed the Sargasso Sea Alliance in Bermuda at one of our meetings. And there was a lot of talk about what to do with this area. And clearly those of us that were there were the believers. We knew the importance of that special resource. We knew that it's a unique open ocean sargassum, you know, it's a based ecosystem. Most of it's in the high seas, and I think you all know what the high seas mean. It's a very important distinction. And it's so important for so many reasons regarding the life history of economically and recreationally, commercially important species. And again, I'm not going to tell you things you don't know, but I think we all can celebrate knowing that it is an abundant, free-floating brown algae. And I want to say that if you listen to Sylvia Earle speak about this, you go away feeling like you just want to do all you can to get your arms around it and protect it forever. I like that. I like that. I feel the same way. But you know, it's important to a lot of species, and Amy and Tiffany wanted me to talk about the importance of the Sargasso Sea to the U.S. and the Commission now, the formation of the Commission and our role, because it is way out there, and it does surround Bermuda, but clearly we have a vested interest in the health of the Sargasso Sea. And, you know, there's many species that migrate through there, the yellowfin, the bluefin tunas. And I won't read to you, but we also see it as important migratory routes for whales and so on. There are many threatened and endangered species that use the Sargasso Sea during that migration. But there are also critters that are unique to the area. Now, this is for the parents that may not have heard this, but there are a lot of endemic species in the Sargasso. There are over 145 species of invertebrates, but there are some that spend their whole life there, and they've always lived there. The Sargassum fish, the Sargassum crab, you get it? The Sargassum shrimp, the Sargassum nudibranch. So these are endemic species found nowhere else but in the floating Sargassum. It's an incredible source of life. And below that, below the floating Sargassum, are the other critters. And these are the critters that the whales are feeding on when they're coming through, or all the plankton feeders, or they're the ones that really form the basis of the food chain that's so incredibly important to that area. But it also serves as an area where it's a nursery. It's an area where eggs are released and they hang around for a while. It's an area that provides habitat for a lot of small individuals, but also habitat for those that sort of lurk around the edges to feed on the slow ones. So, and one thing that I have personally experienced is its importance to turtles, marine turtles. And one time I was sitting in the Keys and I saw a little clump of sargassum go by, and it had 3 little loggerhead turtles on it. They had to have been just born on a beach. Now, it was going towards the Gulf of Mexico, but incredibly important to the turtles during a very important time. I see the poster on the eels back there. I won't tell some of you anything about them, except I've learned so much since becoming a commissioner. I knew this already from my days in biology, but the American and European eels migrate these long distances to spawn, and then they all make their way back to the rivers. It's just an incredible process that the Sargasso Sea is the center of that life. So I've talked about these 2 things here. Again, I just wanted to let you know I know some about it. Or you know a lot more than I do, I think. But I want to point to the things as to why it's so important. It's essential fish habitat. It's important for recreational commercial fisheries. And also I see it personally as a sentinel habitat. If we lose the Sargasso Sea, we're going to lose the planet. And I think that is an incredible point that we cannot hammer home enough. But in the Florida Keys, or off of Texas, or down in the Caribbean, if you don't see these weed lines, this is what the fishermen go out on the water. They look for birds and they look for weed lines. Now, I'm calling it a weed line. It sounds like I'm degrading it, but that's what the fishermen call it. They know what a weed line is, and they support, the recreational fishing community supports the sargassum because they know it is the habitat. It retains a lot of fish. A lot of fish come along to feed it. It's the very beginning of the food chain that's so critical to that area. So our fishermen are dependent on a healthy, constant stream of sargassum. For a few years, and you'll hear me talk about it, the sargassum we weren't getting as much. And they found out that it was being harvested on the East Coast. And I'm going to touch on that. And the fishermen were irate. How can you let this happen? And so I do want to point out that if we don't have good, healthy sargassum, then we don't have places like Islamorada that claim to be the sport fishing capital of the world. And so many billfish and fish that use the sargassum are so important to our recreational fishing industry. But also, I've already mentioned this, and I put this slide here because of the importance of it as we go to the next slide, and that is, it is habitat. It is a special refuge for so many species, particularly the turtles. But it also, there's a lot of threats to it. And I'm going to be talking about 2. These could be viewed by some as economic importance or by others as threats. And I'm not going to talk about any of these right here because we could spend weeks. You know we could spend a week talking about each one of those. But a lot of people don't realize that a North Carolina company had started harvesting sargassum back in the late 90s, all throughout the 90s. And by 2003, the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council realized that they had to develop a fisheries management plan for sargassum. And the South Atlantic Fisheries Management Council had concerns about the commercial harvest, as did many of us, many managers and fishermen that were out there that used it. And you can imagine the bycatch. I don't even want to think about the bycatch that would come up in this commercial take of the sargassum. So they worked really hard to develop a fisheries management plan to protect and manage the sargassum as a fishery resource. And this is sort of what they have to do because the sargassum was seen as a fish. But it was interesting in that it was not only seen as something being taken under a management plan, but it was also seen as essential fish habitat. And so this is a challenge that they have, is that they have to manage it both as a fisheries resource as well as a habitat. So it's unusual in that the sargassum, it grows about 10% per day. So everyone says, why can't we take it? Why can't we? It's renewable. It's sustainable. Well, it's everything else that comes with it that we cannot afford to lose. It's the very basis of an ecosystem that we need to have out there. So to us in the U.S., oh boy. Okay, thank you. Anyway, so they developed the fisheries management plan. They recognized the importance of sargassum as a habitat, and this is really startling to me. Is they were bringing in at one point. Now that the plan calls for 100,000 metric tons per year, and they limited the geographical area where they can take it. The companies actually are no longer working out there. So now the fisheries management plan is focusing primarily, it's there in place, but many of us, if we see something opening up again, we want to take a very quick look at it and prohibit it, or at least see it managed properly. This is the EEZ, the exclusive economic zone inside of which it's being taken, and state waters from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida are included. Something that a lot of people don't know about, and I heard this yesterday at Capitol Hill Ocean Week from a Navy oceanographer, an admiral, who referenced new energy sources. And he was talking about this algae out there in the ocean that they can take as biofuels. I stayed quiet. I stayed very quiet. I didn't dare. I wasn't going to take on the Navy in a public meeting. But there have been patents already given and issued for biofuels using sargassum. So we have to be attentive. Just as soon as we stop paying attention, something happens. Now, I put this slide up there to remind us of what we're dealing with. People say, well, how can you do something with something so vast as the Sargasso Sea? Well, we learned in 1983 with the die-off of the long-spine sea urchin, it swept through the wider Caribbean in a one-year time frame, riding the currents, just like the sargassum rides the currents. So we know things are occurring at very large scales. And in 1989, I was managing Lou Key Sanctuary up here off of Florida, and I had an opportunity to go down to the Tobago Keys in the southern end of the Grenadines to help set up a marine protected area there and a management plan for the Grenadines, or for Tobago Keys. I went down there. I was expecting to see clear water, healthy corals, lots of fish, and I got there and the corals were in worse shape than they were in the Florida Keys. And I was devastated. The water was green. I couldn't figure out why. For 3 weeks, the water was pea soup green. I asked the dive captain, and he said, it's the Orinoco. I said, the Orinoco? And he said, yeah, every year the Orinoco plumes out of the Orinoco River and comes over the southern part of the Caribbean. And I realized that we have a much larger picture that we have to be managing at. We have to be managing at a much larger scale. I'm watching the clock. But what we do know, let me go back. But the thing that's important here is that now we have the technology, we have the tools to step back and look at this at a larger scale. These are tracks of current meters that were deployed, and we know where these currents go now. We know how we're linked and how the connectivity occurs. Bermuda, Robbie has heard me say this, I think, before, but Bermuda gets a lot of our mooring buoys that break off in the Florida Keys. They call us and say, we got some more of your mooring buoys, and keep them. But if you look, the bluer the water, the fresher it is, and you can see this freshwater pluming across, you can see how it's all connected. We're connected to North America, 40% drains into the Gulf, and you can see what's coming out of the Amazon and the Orinoco over here. So we have to look at these scales to manage now for the future. And you all have this opportunity. As you go out there, I never dreamed of this when I was in college or university. We also have deployed over 36 satellite trackers to see how the currents flow between South Florida and the Florida Keys. And we've learned we knew the Florida current was there, but we've learned a lot about the gyres that exist and how we manage the gyres in the area. So you can imagine when I was managing little 5.5 square nautical mile Lou Key Sanctuary, how frustrated I was at that time to realize that everything that was influencing that sanctuary was coming from outside. And I realized I had to step back and take a much bigger picture. And I've been taking that larger picture, and I'm hoping you all, you have more tools and technology, and I call them toys too, to go step back and do that. But you can't forget what's happening at the local scale. You have to do in situ monitoring. You have to be working at the local scale. But now we use satellites to measure our sea surface temperatures, to watch for coral bleaching events on a global scale. We have technology out there that's helping us a lot. But also, we tag things. Now, if you look at this boat's about 32 feet long. And if you start looking, you'll see all these whale sharks. There's 120, I counted 120 whale sharks in that frame. That is Ewing Bank, 40 miles off the coast of Louisiana. And even more significant, it was June 2010. The Deepwater Horizon was blowing and spewing less than 60 miles from this point. Those whale sharks go between us and Mexico. We've tagged them, we know, we've had scientists tag them. So we know now, again on a scale, we know how things are moving at such large scales that we have to be managing at and working at. We have to, the bluefin tuna, this one tuna was tagged up off of Canada, ended up coming down and spent a lot of time in the Gulf of Mexico the year before the blowout. That black area right there is the blowout. This area right here is a spawning aggregation site for the bluefin tuna. We know those things now. We have scientists now using remote sensing to look at large-scale patterns, movement of sargassum. We have the ability to look at nutrients, nearshore pollution. We have the ability, again, to step back. But now we have, NASA is coming in, and they gave our commission a talk recently, and they want to get engaged, and they have some great ideas, and they have more toys than NOAA does, and good toys. So I want to mention this. I want to have a couple of shots of Florida Keys. Now I know I'm running a little tight. I'm going to get it. I'm going to use up my patter 5 minutes, I'm afraid. But the Florida Keys Sanctuary uses what is called coastal marine spatial planning. It's actually marine zoning to manage the resources. It's a large area. And I'm proposing this, and I'm saying this because we look at the Sargasso Sea. There are many tools. I saw this on your list here. But there's areas to be avoided in Florida Keys. It's a particularly sensitive sea area. We have marine zoning, 5 different types of zones. We have a totally sanctuary-wide no discharge. We have no oil and gas development throughout the sanctuary. So we have used marine zoning to not only bring common sense about the way we access and use the resources, to balance the commercial recreational interest to use those resources with protection and conservation. But we're now taking this to other levels. We're working with the Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary has a sister sanctuary relationship with the Dominican Republic and Bermuda. We're now working with Mexico. I'm going down there a week after next to Merida. We're sitting down and talking with the Mexicans about setting up sister sanctuary networks. I've already met with Cubans several times, and Cuba is very interested in setting up a sister sanctuary network. We have some tremendous resources around this region, and there are a lot of banks and pinnacles all around. And I have to say, the Cubans have done a much better job than we have. They've set 20% of their areas aside as fully protected. And I asked my colleague down there, Maritza Garcia, who heads up the national parks and marine protected areas for Cuba. I said, Maritza, how do you do this? Man, they get so angry in the U.S. They hung me in effigy one time. They have riots. And she looked at me and she smiled and she said, we just signed the paper, Billy. So I'm not advocating a dictatorship, but sometimes when NEPA isn't there, things are a little easier sometimes. But anyway, we've been meeting with the Mexicans, the Cubans. We're taking these things that we're learning about these distances and we're taking them to other scales. I'm encouraged by what we know. I'm encouraged about the advanced technology that you're inheriting. I think we now have the capability of stepping back and looking on a large scale. I don't think it's Pollyannish to think that we can work through international agreements to reach across vast areas. I think we know more about the area than we ever did before, and we have the tools to apply it. And we're starting to make some really significant strides. I've heard microbes mentioned several times here today. I tell you, we now know so much more from the microbes to the community scales about what's happening in the oceans. Thank you very much. You do a couple questions?
We do have about 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, great. All right. Excellent.
So something that we've been talking about a lot and something that was a big struggle for us while we were creating our proposal was enforcement in these protected areas. So I was wondering what sort of enforcement measures that you use when you're looking at like the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. What does that look like, particularly for areas that are a lot farther offshore?
phenomenal. Great question. I hate to say great question because no one's going to ask the next one because they don't want it to be great. They're all great. Enforcement is the key issue that comes up with all stakeholder groups. And if you just set areas aside and don't provide the protection that they need, then you're not only wasting your time, you're actually setting the area up for loss. And so we have our own enforcement entities that we use. We fund different groups, but we have NOAA enforcement. We use the Coast Guard when their priorities are shifted a little bit towards ours. So we do a lot of work with a lot of enforcement entities. But now, again, we're starting to get tools that give us the ability to step back and look at a larger scale. So we're discussing some of those capabilities. So it's a key component of marine protected area management. We try to rely on education and outreach first to reach about 80% of the public. We try to reach there's about 80% will do what's right if they know what they should do. So just setting an area aside without enforcement does help. It does have with those that comply immediately. 15% will come down and do what they want to do until they get confronted, and then they comply because they don't want to get a ticket. 5% get up in the morning to go break the law. And that's the one you have to hammer, hammer, hammer. Because if you don't hammer them, you're going to erode at 15%, and then that erodes at the 80%. So we are keenly, we hear from the fishermen, we'll comply if you don't let these other guys get out there and take everything. So, and there's not a perfect silver bullet for it. But it takes constant collaboration and work. We've had a big meeting this week in D.C. about enforcement of marine protected areas and sanctuaries.
We have a situation in Barbados right now with massive amounts of sargassum washing ashore and onto beaches, and everybody's in a kind of quandary about whether we advise people to use the sargassum, wash it, and put it on their crops as fertilizer, and whether that's a slippery slope, opening up the possibility for harvest at sea, which we would not want to happen. But it's an unusual phenomenon that happens periodically, and I don't know what your feelings, and I'd love to hear anything.
Well, the reason I started smiling is that we're hearing all about it. Let me tell you, every time we go down there, people say, "You're trying to protect this stuff, guys. You smell this." And then we try to convince them it's part of the natural process. Galveston, Texas had 6-foot-deep racks of sargassum. Now, that is a part of the process. We try to explain the importance of it to hold the sand together and to perform the next layer of growth and so on. But I think using it anyway, once it's on the beach, I think that's fair game. And I don't think it is a slippery slope. And I think it would. We encourage them in Galveston, not just they pick it up with big truckloads and then haul it somewhere. And we've been trying to encourage them to use it for something that it's suitable for. And so, yes, the answer is yes. But they wonder still that you're running around, why were you protecting sargassum all the time? Now, there is a different species, a little bit, I don't want to steal someone's thunder, but I know someone was talking about that. I saw another hand up over. Yes?
How is the harvesting monitored? Is it through permitting process?
They were starting to, like National Fisheries Service does, they were going to put monitors on the boats. But both companies went out of business just shortly after they developed the management plan because they couldn't meet, it wasn't sustainable enough for them. That 100 metric tons per year wasn't enough. So they went out of business. So, but they were going to have people ride on the boats as observers.
It's monitored so well in the Prince William Sound for the salmon fisheries with openers and things, and it's all done through permitting, and you close it down when a certain amount is taken. I was just wondering if it's...
Yeah, that management plan had all of that in it, permitting, allowances for allowable catch. And the sad thing is they also had allowances for bycatch. And I just can't really accept that.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you. The visualizations of connectivity are beautiful, of course, and so important, but I wonder what are the prospects for getting connectivity to larger scale impacts on the table for management for the underwater?
We just had a meeting, a real secret meeting, I'm not even supposed to talk about it. With Cuba. It was 2 delegations particularly when I said, your lobster or our lobster. And then they looked at me and I said, but they come back to you too. So it has to give it, it's that connectivity and that connection. And when you can identify, fish aggregation sites at one end or the other, you can work together to to protect those areas, to preserve those areas that are so important. So the connectivity is the thing that just catches everyone's attention. And then the large-scale movement of the megafauna. We know whales move a long distance. We know whale sharks move long distances. But to know exactly where they go, and to tag them and understand that, is giving us so much information. So connectivity with the spatial and temporal extent is giving us so many tools that I'm encouraged. Some people think I'm a little Pollyannish. Do I look Pollyannish? We got from Texas, man. But anyway, it's amazing that I really think that this generation right here, and I'm hoping I planted a couple of seeds for the future, because I think there's so much that you can do. And we certainly need the engineering involved. We need large-scale engineering work. There's more to be done. But you picked up on connectivity. The Cubans loved that. They didn't have that. One of the things we did, we sent back all of our websites. We can't give them technology, but depending on the bandwidth, they have access to everything we have on the internet. So we just sent them 4 pages of web links. They've been loving them.
Thank you so much.